Buying a Revenant. Written and directed by Quade Krulik. Narration and production by Trey Falco. Featuring Quade Krulik, Joshua Oglesby, and Kara Oglesby.
That's the sound of my favorite machine in my house. My espresso machine, giving my coffee that extra boost of energy that I need in the mornings. I can't operate without my coffee, but that extra bit of kick in the morning is what really made me the top salesperson at the office this month. My car keys go into the Toyota, and I plug my iPhone into the car dock and immediately turn to see what new podcast to listen to. I haven't even left my parking spot or put the car in reverse. The car isn't even on. I adhere to a strict routine. I've heard that kind of thing keeps you successful. Guess where I heard that? It was from the first podcast I ever heard, 120 Days to a Newer, Healthier You with Dr. Simon Nichols. And ever since then, I think it's the easiest way to entertain yourself throughout the day. You know, the other day, a coworker started bragging about a radio contest they had entered. And at first, I didn't remember what a radio was. Thankfully, it came back to me. To stay conducted to my schedule, I always pick a podcast to listen to on the way to work and back home. The commute is about 30 minutes to work. It's long enough to get half an episode on my way to work. Recently, I've been sneaking in a few episodes while I'm in my cubicle. I always wait for my supervisor to get in their office, and then I just slide in my AirPods and listen to the voices as discreetly as I can. Oh, I couldn't help myself. The last one I was listening to was the most compelling story I've ever heard. I thought it was going to go on forever. Hearing the actors and the sound effects unnerved me, but that's only because I'm not usually into horror. And when the last episode rolled by, I hated it. It was completely horrifying. God, I loved it. But for days, I was trying to find another show that was just as good as this last one. And I was hoping that I could find something that would just grab my attention. But no such luck. I was given a lot of them the 3-episode rule, but nothing was getting me interested in them. My routine was getting thrown off. I was coming into work later and later by the minute. And I couldn't figure out why I just couldn't show up to work on time. It kept on failing me every single time. And after the second week, oh boy, my supervisor made a point to chew me out in front of everybody. After 3 hours, thankfully, it was time for lunch. So I walked into the break room, and I opened up my briefcase, and I discovered how bad my lack of routine was messing me up. My sandwich had anchovies on turkey with wheat bread. I was about to eat fish, bird, and cardboard. No kind of vegetable was on the sandwich, and it was layered with mayonnaise. And I scrunched my face and threw it all away. Instead, I got a Snickers bar out of the vending machine and opened up a bag of potato chips and a Coke bottle. I popped my AirPods into my ears and tried once again to find a podcast that I really liked. And I tapped on one that was titled Deal or No Deal is the Deal. Ugh, it was the most depressing idea for a show I've ever heard. It was a cast member from Full House reviewing old Deal or No Deal episodes. What the hell is this bullshit?
What?
I was so distracted that I completely failed to notice that Sarah had walked into the break room. She looked at me and It was too loud for me not to explain what I'd said. Sorry. I've just been a little distracted lately.
I know. Usually you're 10 minutes earlier than I am. Now you're 20 minutes behind me. What's been going on?
I don't know. I've been listening to podcasts as part of my routine. And my routine is my rock. And without it, I just fall apart. I listened to this really good horror podcast, but when it was over, I couldn't find one that I liked as much. And so I haven't been listening to any new shows. And it's completely thrown me off my routine. And it's just having this ripple effect on the rest of my life.
That is the dumbest, most first world problem that I've ever heard.
I know, but it's important to me. Sarah grabbed her phone and started to walk over to me. Her thumb scrolled down on her phone. And when she turned to stand at my side, she pointed her phone at me and told me to listen to a particular show I hadn't heard of yet.
Here, listen to this one. It's really good, and it's super long, and it's really, really scary.
I don't know. I'm not really into scary stories.
Didn't you say the podcast you fell in love with was a scary story?
She had a point. The last one I really liked was a horror story, and it was more compelling and attention-grabbing than any other podcast I had listened to. The podcast was called Death and Desktops. Okay. That title definitely has me interested, especially since I've been so dissatisfied and honestly been sucking at work recently. After work, I plugged my phone into my car and turned the key. When the car came on, I hit the play button on the very first episode of Death and Desktops.
My espresso machine giving me my coffee that extra boost of energy that I need in the mornings. I can't operate without my coffee, but that extra...
I was extremely into Death and Desktops. I think it's possibly the best thing I've ever listened to, whether podcast or anything else like music, movies, or television. The only thing I can seem to listen to is this new show. And after I was hooked on the very first episode, I scrolled through their page and saw that they had hundreds of episodes to the podcast, which I thought was not only impressive of the creators to make so much content, but it was also extremely lucky for me. My routine has come back into full swing, and for the past month, I was able to pull my sale numbers back up. I thought that it would take me a while to really get back into the swing of things, but it didn't take me any time at all. Sarah even commented on my productivity a few days ago.
Jesus, you weren't kidding about that routine of yours. It's kind of scary to think of how much better you are when you have your set routine down. Should I worry about my job?
No, I'm not out to prove anything. I just want to do a good, consistent job is all. But thank you for the compliment. You know, Sarah's kind of cute. I think I'm going to ask her out to dinner in about a week or so. I just really want to nail down this one sale with one of our clients. I think that will really impress her. Anyways, as the day came to an end, I started to plug in my car and listen to the next episode. I had finished one while I was working out and was eager to get the next show started. But before I pressed play on my phone, I had a thought that maybe it wasn't my routine that was making me so good at work or daily life. Possibly, it was just the podcast. I mean, sure, the first one was what told me to start making a routine. But it was also the very first time I started listening to the podcast. It could be my routine, but it could be the podcast. The weekend starts tomorrow, and I usually go for a morning run. I wonder if I should try and put it to the test. I don't really do too much on Saturdays that would be considered productive at work or financially, but I always go for a morning run, and I always clean my house. I woke up and almost instinctively began to pour coffee grinds into the machine, and I pressed start. And as soon as I heard the motor on the machine, I shook my head and asked myself, what am I doing? As soon as the mug was full, I thought about taking a sip of the mug just for a quick taste, but I decided against it. I said I was going to break the routine today, and I wasn't going to cheat. I poured all of the black, amazing drink down the sink, got into my running pants and shoes, and put on a thin, long-sleeve shirt. Grabbed my phone and keys, and out the door I went. I began to drive to the hospital where there was a running track around the property. I zipped my phone and keys into the pockets and started out slowly. I usually need the energy from my coffee to help me get the boost to start the run. Just starting, I can already feel the lack of caffeine in my system making me sluggish. That may have nothing to do with my routine, but I think now is the time to start seeing if it's the coffee or the podcast that seem to get me going in the mornings.
I always wait for my supervisors to get into their office, then I just slide in my AirPods and listen to the voices as discreetly as I can. I couldn't help myself. The last one I was listening to was the most compelling story I had.
Okay, strong evidence to suggest that it's the podcast. Hitting that play button felt like I was pushing it on myself. I'm already going faster on my run, and to top it all off, I'm feeling no fatigue. I feel like I can just keep on going and going. Tomorrow, I need to try this again. Sundays aren't really that busy at all. I mean, I sleep in very late in the morning, wake up around 11 or 12, 12 being noon, obviously. Why would you wake up at midnight when you have work the following day? Anyways, I wake up, usually take a look at my finances, nothing too serious. I just log into my bank account and make sure that nothing crazy on my credit or debit cards has appeared. And then I just relax for the day. Nothing crazy. So I woke up, and per usual, I walked to the kitchen and tried to start up the coffee machine again, but thankfully, I stopped myself before I pressed the start button. I just left the coffee in the machine for when I want some later. I figured it wouldn't mind lasting a day or two. I went over to my coffee table with my iPad, and I started logging onto my app, and I felt exhausted. I didn't think I was going to be able to push on the iPad. It was embarrassing. I was about to fall asleep on my couch from barely pushing a damn touchscreen. I thought about just saying screw it and getting my coffee and starting out the day with a boost, though I would never admit to anybody, maybe even myself, that I needed a cup of joe to keep working a freaking iPad. Now, thankfully, at this moment, I thought to myself that I had an experiment to continue. So, I got one AirPod, put it in my ear, and took my phone out of my pajama pants. I opened the app, and sure enough, there was Death and Desktops. I was on episode 203. Honestly, it's rather funny that I'd come so far, but I guess not impossible considering how much I listen to it every day, and each episode's only an hour long. I clicked play, and all of a sudden, it was the same feeling as it was on Saturday. I felt like pushing that button made me feel 100 times better.
Sarah's kind of cute. I think I'm going to ask her out to dinner in about a week or so. I just want to nail down this one sale with one of our clients. I think that will really impress her. Anyways, as the day came to an end, I started to plug in my car and listen to the
I didn't even bother turning on the television. I just kept on listening to Death and Desktops. And at the end of each episode, I heard the obligatory plug for money. Check out our PayPal, Patreon, and check out our sponsor's website. Don't forget to use our discount code for this product's website to get a certain percentage off the overpriced whatever. I started to feel shitty that this entire time I was kind of knocking these people plugging all these ways to make money. They have made so much amazing content, and they've made so many episodes, so I was in no fear of running out anytime soon, even at the rate I was listening to it. Hell, even if I finished it, I loved it so much I'd listen to it all over again. This is their job. And all this effort they put into it clearly has to be a full-time effort. It's free, so a little money always helps. I decided maybe it wouldn't hurt to see what they had available for their Patreon. Their Patreon was fairly modest. They had $100 and $200 tiers, but they started as low as just $1. I looked at the prizes, and some of them were clearly fluff that was added to the tier to make it seem like you were getting more than a value of the money you were paying, but wasn't really anything special. But each tier seemed like it had some kind of worth to it. The Potential, or the $1, was offering a copy of the script to an episode of the patron's choosing, complete with director's notes and editor alterations. The Follower tier, which cost $5, was offering pictures of the Deals of the Dead. In parentheses, it said that meant production of the podcast. The cost bumped up to $20. and that one was called the Acolyte. It was saying that this tier provides the service of asking the Lord of Darkness one question. Again, in parentheses, it said that this only meant a 30-minute Skype call with the creator of the podcast. This is all kind of creepy yet intriguing, and that their Patreon tiers were named after cult-like titles. But it fit in with the story of the podcast, and that the main character was being stalked by the cult in the story, and demons were affecting the main character's ability to function in society and with work. So I scrolled on. The $50 tier was called the Blood Brother. Now, this wasn't a term that I had heard in the podcast yet. I'd heard all the others, Acolyte, Potential, Follower, but Blood Brother I hadn't heard yet. I was curious, and was even more intrigued by what the prize involved. You get a signed metal award that you have joined the family and will begin your journey with us in the pursuit of darkness and enlightenment. The award was black and reflective with gold lining. It was the head of a goat with a pentagram in the background of the head. And the insignias were in cursive, as though it was handwritten in the gold lettering. It seemed a lot more expensive than worth just $50, but I liked it. The wooden frame that would actually hold the award would be signed by the creator and the executive producer. Both the Dark Lord and the Father were listed. In parentheses again, it said Lucius Rains and Anton Christensen. I was rather impressed with the dedication to the lore of the story with their tiers. I thought it was a strong nod to the audience showing devotion to their fans. I'd seen other shows do this before, but my favorite podcast showing this level of commitment really made me want to support them that much more. The $100 tier was called Senior Brother. Not really that creative a title, but hey, they were best suited with making sure their story was good. I don't really need them making their tiers that creative, but this one had two prizes that stood out to me. It was listed that you got to look into your slowly darkening soul with the Father. The correction of this was that you got a 1-hour Skype call with the executive producer. Along with that, you got a printable symbol that was told you could paint onto your car or the wall of your house. Hell, even get a tattoo from the local parlor. I thought that might be a little arrogant to think that your audience would be so devoted to do something as permanent to their lifestyle, but all of a sudden, I thought it was something I would totally do. The $200 tier was called the Revenants. It listed that you would be reborn anew and would begin your journey and start to follow down the darkness and would begin to affect others into the realm of the void and present them to the Father for approval to the Lord of Darkness. This one got me really excited, but I was confused because there wasn't any kind of correction or explanation behind this tier. It was just what was listed in the cult-like explanations. It didn't say anything more. I was curious, and I honestly was starting to wonder what the hell was going on with that tier. All the other tiers even said previous tier prizes included, meaning that you got everything leading up to the tier you were paying. But for the Revenants, you were just paying for this tier and that was it. I thought that might be a little cheap, but all the other tiers were really generous. This one had to be good. I plugged in my credit card information and paid for the Revenant tier of the podcast.
Sundays aren't really that busy at all. I sleep in very late in the morning. I wake up like around 11 or 12. 12 being noon, obviously. Why would you wake up at midnight when you have a work day the following day? Anyways, I wake up, usually take a look at my finances. Nothing serious. I just log onto my bank account and make sure that nothing crazy is on my credit card or my debit card. That's when the voices start. They always come on Sundays. They want me to know they're there. I don't know how to stop them anymore. They weren't as bad as when I started to listen to the Father's radio broadcast. I thought that it would be good to hear his life coaching back then. But now, I just wish he would give me my soul back.
I was interrupted by the ringing of my cell phone. I looked over, and it was Sarah. Ah, shit! I made a date with her, and I need to be there in 30 minutes. God, how did I forget? Doesn't matter, just get some quick cleaning done and ignore the call. I quickly cleaned my face and applied deodorant and put on some clothes. Not fancy clothes, definitely casual, but, casual, but serious casual. Like, I look this good when I'm not even trying. Honestly, I could have done better, but it was going to have to do. Sarah called again. I was going to be late, but I couldn't ignore another one of her calls.
Hey, I didn't hear from you today, and it's around that time. Just wanted to make sure we were still on tonight.
Yeah, no, sorry about that, but I'm on my way. Just damn traffic, and on a Sunday. There wasn't a single person on the road. I hope to God Sarah wouldn't notice that when I picked her up, but I really didn't have much of a choice. But thankfully, it went normally and was a happy-go-lucky casual kind of date. I didn't get the feeling she was feeling awkward or judging me harshly for being late. Monday had started, and I went to my kitchen to get breakfast, but I didn't even try to go near my coffee. I looked at it for a second, but I was completely confident that I'd be able to start the day just listening to Death and Desktops. I was really excited about the next edition. The narrator went out on a date just like me in the last episode. I'm curious to hear how it turned out today. I grabbed my keys, got into my Toyota, and I proceeded to do what I always do. I plugged in my phone before I even started up the car. And it wasn't long until I was on the road and listening to the very next episode.
The ride to work wasn't that bad. The voices weren't in my ear anymore. I started to turn on the radio to get the weather report, but I wasn't sure if it would be safe. It wasn't that long ago that the voices were coming from the radio. I hesitated, but pushed the button like I was expecting it to punch me in the face. It cranked on, and I was looking forward to the weather report. No voices. Thank God. I was looking forward to work. I thought maybe if the radio would work, maybe it would be okay to plug in my phone. I pushed play and began to listen to the show, like always. After all, now thankfully at this moment, I thought to myself that I had an experiment to continue. So I got one AirPod and put it in my ear and took my phone out of my pajama pants. I opened the app, and sure enough, there was Death and Desktops.
When I walked into work, it seemed like no one looked up as I walked through the door. I sat at my cubicle, turned on my desktop, and I could already see that I had some messages from my supervisor. I pulled some files out of my briefcase, laid them on my desk, and then I heard someone behind me.
A little late in today, aren't we?
What? No, There wasn't anybody behind me when I turned. Eric in the cubicle over peeked around the cubicle wall to see what I was saying, assuming I was talking to him. But I just shook my head and he went back to his work. I paid it no mind until a few hours later when I was on a break. I started to pull out some leftover steak and rice out of the microwave when I heard another voice behind me.
That looks delicious.
I turned around, assuming that there was another coworker behind me. But again, there wasn't a soul behind me. In fact, the voice I heard and the voice in the break room, they weren't ones I'd ever heard before. Maybe I was just listening to too much of the podcast. A little too much. I'm starting to hear voices all the time. I went back to my cubicle and started to type out a report on my computer. An hour went by after that when I got a Facebook message on my phone. I opened it up, and it was sent from someone named Terrence Cardigan. The message was brief and simply said, "Put your phone down." Then I heard a real voice come from behind me.
Quit playing on Facebook. You have reports due by the end of this week.
My boss saw me with my phone. This didn't make any sense. We didn't have anybody by the name of Terrence Cardigan at the office. And how did they know my boss was right around the corner? Very funny prank, too. My boss is super strict on social media shit at work. By the end of the day, I was walking to my car when it happened again.
Can't wait to get closer to you.
I turned as fast as I could, but there wasn't anyone there. Well, no one close enough to sound that close to me. I just shrugged it off and finished walking the rest of the way to my car. And when I got in, I did what I always do and immediately plugged in my phone. I turned on the radio, but where it usually starts out playing music, I heard something different.
We're always going to be with you.
I turned it over to the channel that's blank so that I can listen to my phone. I thought that was a bit odd since the station is always playing music on repeat, but I figured it was just an ad playing. And when I pulled out of the parking lot, I immediately started listening to Death and Desktops. But in that moment, I started to feel very sick. It seemed to come out of nowhere because, honestly, I don't usually get very sick. But I hunched over my steering wheel, thinking I was about to throw up. And then all of a sudden, I heard honking from the car behind me, and I realized the light at the intersection had turned green. And when I finally stepped on the gas and started to pull away, I noticed the radio station had changed. The voice on the radio had started to tell me that there was another big prize on the Death and Desktops Patreon, which was odd because you don't usually hear ads for podcasts on the radio. I switched it back to the blank station so that I could listen to my podcast, thinking it was a little weird at this point to keep switching back and forth between the same stations. But as I switched, the numbers kept rolling past my blank station and back to the station with the advertisement. I tried once more, but it kept happening, and this continued the entire way home. When I got home, I pulled off my tie and unbuttoned my shirt. I grabbed my tablet, sat down on the couch, and went to the Death and Desktops Patreon page. And sure enough, there was a new tier that hadn't been there before. It was for $1, and again, it was a term I hadn't heard of. The doorway. Now, those who had already subscribed to The Revenant need not apply. This allows access to the dark world. Soon we will edge closer and closer to those that decide to join us, whether willingly or under false pretenses. I thought this was a little bit darker, and it seemed a little more intent. Most of the other tiers were mostly hand-in-cheek. They were playfully creative and using parentheses. But like The Revenant, these were more serious. I thought that they may be trying to pitch something, but this was only $1. I pushed it off again since I'd already subscribed to the Revenant tier, closed my tablet, and began to make myself some dinner. The sizzling of the pan-fried steaks I was cooking was loud, and the beer I was gulping down began to hinder my functions. But all of that aside, I was starting to feel uneasy. Not sick like before, but I just had this unnerving feeling that someone else was with me in the kitchen. I found myself looking back over my shoulder constantly. It was about time to flip the steak over when I heard a familiar voice call me by name. "Who's there?" The voice replied.
We're all here.
This time, it was too close to ignore. I was clearly hearing someone talking to me. I couldn't explain it. These voices, they weren't in my head. They weren't coming from the radio, and they definitely weren't coming from the podcast. Were they in my head?
No, we're not in your head.
We're very real. We're all around you.
And we've grown so close. We only want to get closer.
I don't understand. Where did you all come from? After the bell rung, all I could hear was the sizzling steak. It was done by now, so I turned off the stove and walked to my door to open it. But there was no one there. A strong gust of wind blew me back into the house.
You invited us in. You wanted us in. You wanted us to help you live your life better. And now we've become so close, haven't we?
I was so confused. The only thing that was helping me with my life was the podcast. Listening to it was the only thing that actually gave me any kind of solace. The next day at work, I was exhausted. Hearing voices in your apartment tends to keep you awake at night, waiting to see if they'll say anything else. I turned off the podcast as soon as I sat at my cubicle and started getting to work. But as soon as I sat down, it was as though nothing had stopped. All I could hear was more voices, nothing deliberate. They were all whispering in my ear. But the whispers were loud enough. They drowned out all other noise in the office.
Work's only gonna get harder. Let us in more. We can help.
If you don't let us in, you could get fired. You don't want that, do you?
Of course he doesn't want that. He wants our help. Because we can help him.
Shut up!
Oh, I didn't say anything.
I turned around as fast as I could, only to find Sarah standing above me. She was holding a few folders in her arms. My eyes widened, and I tried to apologize as quickly as I could. I tried to think of some flimsy excuse. Anything will do as to why I just told my girlfriend to shut up. But nothing came to mind, so all I did was apologize and ask what the folders were for.
Oh, it's just a few reports that I thought you would look over really quickly. Are you feeling okay? The bags under your eyes are starting to look a little heavy.
I nodded my head and took the folders from her. I tried to shoot her a quick smile to assure her that I wasn't angry at her. I assured her that I was all right and that I was just tired, which is technically true. I didn't think it would be an easy conversation to have to admit that I was going insane. Sarah shot me one more look of concern and turned to walk back to her cubicle. I turned around and looked at my computer.
Seems like she really cares about you. Perhaps you should tell her the truth. She might understand.
I'm not listening to you.
We know you are. We're so close. We know that you're listening.
It might be easier if you just let us in. That way, you won't have to hear us as much. We'll all be one.
I don't even know how to let you in. How could I possibly... No. I'm not entertaining this. Leave me alone.
It's only going to get harder the further you push us away.
I was starting to get terrified. These voices were unnatural, and I wasn't used to them yet. I was trying to think of some way to escape, some way to block out the sound as these whispers were getting louder and louder. It was getting harder to ignore, and with these louder voices, I was getting to a point where I didn't know what to do. The only solution I could think of was the only solution that had worked before. I started to listen to my podcast.
Most of the other tiers were mostly hand-in-cheek. They were playfully creative and using parentheses, but like the Revenant, these were more serious. I thought that they may be trying to pitch something, but this was only $1. I pushed it off again since I already subscribed to the Revenant.
It was good to listen to it, and I was happy that my boss didn't notice me because I was about to lose it. I decided to listen to one more episode, and then I wanted to see if the voices were still there. I wasn't exactly sure how a podcast could cure me of being possessed, but I was willing to try anything at this point. And it had been a solution in the past. When the episode wrapped up, I took my AirPods out of my ears and I started to look around, like I would see who was the source of these voices, despite having seen anyone yet. When someone called out "good morning" to me, I turned to see who it could be, dreading that it would be a voice with no one there. But thankfully it was my boss, in a new suit, and only my boss. No one else was there. I turned around and looked at my desktop, and it was 9 a.m. I'd spent the entire evening in my office, listening to the podcast. No, I could have sworn I'd only listened to 3 one-hour episodes. How is this possible?
Normally, it wouldn't be possible. But then again, we hear voices in their head. Yet, it's happening.
Did I stay here the entire night?
You did. Funny how time flies when you're having a good time. Listening to things that you like.
I spent the entire workday hearing voices continue to talk to me. But I paid no attention to them, trying to ignore them, hoping and wishing that they'd go away on their own. They hadn't. And at this point, I was begging them to. Please. Please. Go away. Just leave me alone. When I finally got back to my apartment, I tried searching on Google for anything like this. I scrolled, and I even typed different things into the search bar, hoping to find a match for anything. Voices in your head. How to get rid of voices in your head. The last thing I searched was, am I cursed by voices? I told myself I would only look through the first page of Google, considering I'd been at this for hours at this point. I thought it was a long shot, but I was getting desperate. But at the very bottom of the first page, there was a link to a Reddit thread. And it was too close to home to ignore. The title of the thread read, "My podcast has possessed me." I skimmed through the large chunks of text before reaching the bottom and seeing the too long didn't read portion. It read, "Help. I'm hearing voices after listening to a new podcast. I can't escape them. They torment me day in and day out. This is hitting a little too close to home and getting all too familiar." The name of the podcast is Death and Desktops. This had to be a joke. This couldn't be real.
Oh, it's very real. In fact, it's the only thing that makes sense, doesn't it? We told you we were getting closer. And don't you recognize our voices?
At first I didn't, but they sounded like characters and actors on the show. It couldn't have been them. How did I not notice before?
Maybe you were hearing us all wrong. But since you were listening to the podcast so much, you couldn't tell the difference. But now, we're close enough for you to hear us all the time.
Stop it. That's not possible. I wasn't sure exactly who to turn to. I looked back all over the Reddit thread, but there didn't seem to be a way to stop it. At least, no one had posted about it. I picked up my phone and started to dial Sarah. I wasn't sure who else to turn to.
Oh, calling Sarah, are you?
You haven't seen that much of each other recently. Don't you think that might freak her out?
Shut up!
Come on. We're only trying to help. Don't you want us to get closer?
Hello?
Sarah, hi, it's me. Look, can you come over? It's an emergency.
Sure, babe. I'll be there in a little bit.
Sarah's such a nice girl.
Shut up! The doorbell rang and I rushed to open the door. Sarah's wearing some very casual clothes with her purse and her hair done up, so I invited her in. Sarah, you've got to help me. I don't know what, but you've got to do something.
What is it? What can I do?
Ever since I started listening to that podcast, you know the one.
Yeah, of course.
Everything was great at first. It was really fun, entertaining even. But now I'm starting to, hear voices.
What do you mean by voices?
I don't know. They keep coming in and out. Sometimes it's whispers. Sometimes it's louder. Sometimes it's intangible. And sometimes they tell me they want to get closer and closer.
Oh my God, are you serious?
Look, I know it's hard to believe, but...
You can't blame us, Sarah. We're following the Father's instructions. After you listen to a certain amount of episodes, we start to get... close.
You know the rules. We do what the Father tells us.
Don't get mad at us because you're not ready, when we've been following the orders.
What was going on? Sarah could hear the voices too?
Of course she can hear our voices.
I don't understand. How does she know what you're saying?
She recommended the podcast to you. She helps us find who we want next. People who struggle, desperately looking for ways to make their lives easier and more productive. You had hit a rut. You needed some help. You started listening to us. And we started making things better for you. Now we're so close. So very close.
You mean you've done this before?
We love to help people transform so they can be a part of our stories.
Why else do you think we have so many episodes to share? Because so many people want someone else to help them with their lives.
Sarah started to smile.
I think you made this a little too easy for us. You became far more obsessed with listening to the stories and wanting help in your life than anyone ever has before.
I screamed at her. Get out! Just leave me alone! Sarah left, but the entire time she stared and smiled at me.
Didn't I tell you? She was such a nice girl.
The next day at work, the voices were whispering in my head, and I had the feeling that Sarah kept staring at me. Her cubicle wasn't close to mine, but it felt like the office was empty. And it was just the two of us. She kept replaying the day over and over again when she recommended the podcast. After my boss left, I went to the Patreon and found the Revenant tier. I kept reading, trying to figure out what the hell it meant. So I looked up the definition of Revenant. It's someone that dies and comes back to torment the living.
Don't worry. That's not exactly what's going to happen to you.
I didn't respond to that, mainly because it depressed the hell out of me. At closing time, I stood for my cubicle, accepting that I hadn't gotten hardly anything done. This has got to stop. Otherwise, I was going to get fired from my job. I got into my car, and without plugging in my phone, when I turned on the radio, it started playing the podcast. I tried to switch stations, but the podcast kept playing on every single station. I tried to turn the radio off, but to no avail. It stayed on, and the podcast kept on playing. And when I got home, I staggered into my apartment and laid flat on my couch. The whispers were loud, but they were just whispers. The voices hadn't started talking to me yet. All of a sudden, my phone came to life and the podcast continued to play. I tried to turn it off, and it kept going. I turned off the screen, tried to hit pause. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. With the podcast being the menace in my life that had opened this doorway, I was ready to be rid of it. I grabbed a hammer from my tool drawer and smashed my phone as hard as I could. The phone was in pieces and shattered all around. But the speakers still played the podcast. I took the pieces of my phone, placed them into a bag, and then I took them into the backyard of my apartment complex. I dug a small hole, placed the bag inside, and buried it, and I listened for a moment. But there was absolutely no sound. When I got back to my apartment, my stereo system was playing the podcast. So, I took the hammer, turned it to the curved, sharp end, and began stabbing the speakers until they were destroyed. But the podcast continued, though it was muffled through the destroyed speakers. And then, my tablet flashed to life and began playing the podcast. And then my television came on, and through the speakers on it, I could hear the podcast. And it continued to grow louder and louder, and then, the last thing I wanted to hear.
Things will go a lot easier if you just let us get close.
I took the hammer to the tablet, I destroyed the television until there was no sound of the podcast anywhere near my apartment. And to stop the voices, I went to bed without dinner, 3 hours early. But I couldn't sleep. No, the whispers were too loud, and the voices kept trying their best to get my attention. I barely looked professional as I staggered to work. This had been the third time I'd done this. Sarah looked at me as I walked through, and she could barely contain her laughter. God, I wanted to punch her. She was treating this as if it was some sort of joke to her. And then I heard my boss stomp over to my cubicle as I sat down.
You're gonna get it now.
This is the third time you've shown up like this. I don't know what to do with you. You've been given warning after warning, and today you're showing up late? You've been such a valued employee, but I don't think there's any other choice.
I started to beg and plead, but I was so tired. I could barely get the words out.
You're fired. You need to get out.
From across the office space, I could hear laughter and immediately recognized it as Sarah's. I went to the supply closet and got my cardboard box. Sauntered back over to my cubicle. I'm sure everybody thought I was glum or disappointed, but the truth is, I was just exhausted. I cleared my desk, but the whole time Sarah was staring at me. I thought she was nice, but turns out she's just a freak who was enjoying some sick game. As I was leaving my job, I entered the stairway and I stood there looking down. Thought to myself, fired or not, I'm gonna hear these voices for the rest of my life. I hadn't listened to the podcast in forever, but they're still here. They haven't stopped. I just kept on saying that I didn't see any other choice. I took the stairs up instead of down, and I left the box with all my belongings in my cubicle in the stairwell. I didn't care. The voices were whispering, but they were loud. No one was speaking to me, but they were loud. They were so loud, and I stepped onto the ledge. God, they were so very loud. And I looked at the pavement. They were still so loud. And I leaned forward. My body weight carried me over the edge. All of a sudden, it was the loudest voice I'd ever heard, speaking to me.
Fall, my dark child. Fall into me.
All of a sudden, it was dark, and there were no more voices. I woke up from my bed, dreading what may come next, but hopeful that everything I had experienced was just a dream. I hoped as I walked to my kitchen. I started to go about my daily routine when all of a sudden, I heard something familiar. That's the sound of my favorite machine in my house. My espresso machine giving my coffee that extra boost of energy that I need in the mornings. I can't operate without my coffee, but that extra bit of kick in the morning is what really has made me the top salesperson at the office this month. Wait a minute. No, wait, I've said that before. I waited a few hours. Recently, I've been sneaking in a few episodes while I'm in my cubicle. I always wait for my supervisor to get in their office when I just slide in my AirPods and listen to the voices as discreetly as I can. But I couldn't help myself. The last one I was listening to was the most compelling story I'd ever heard. I thought it was going to go on forever. Hold on. I've said that too.
Now, we're as close as we'll ever be.
No. This can't be happening.
Now, someone will hear your story on our show. They'll fall in love with a new tale. And Sarah will send us a brand new Revenant. Thank you for your donation, and welcome to the show.
Buying a Revenant. Written and directed by Quade Krulik. Narration and production by Trey Falco. Featuring Quade Krulik, Joshua Oglesby, and Kara Oglesby.